The bustling press room at the United Center had seen countless moments of triumph and defeat, but none quite like this. The air was thick with anticipation as reporters from every major network huddled together, their cameras ready to capture what could be the most significant press conference in basketball history. Among them sat Elias Kane, a veteran sports journalist who had covered Michael Jordan's career from its meteoric rise to this very moment. The room buzzed with whispers and speculation. Kane had seen it all throughout his 20-year career, championships, comebacks, and countless press conferences. But something felt different today. The energy was electric, charged with an uncertainty that made even the most seasoned reporters shift nervously in their seats. Kane glanced down at his worn leather notebook, its pages filled with stories of Jordan's legendary career. He'd been there for the championship victories, the famous flu game, and the first retirement announcement. But this time, the stakes felt higher, the questions heavier. The world wasn't just waiting for another sports story. They were waiting for the final chapter of a legacy. The sound of footsteps echoed through the hallway, and the room fell into a hushed silence. Michael Jordan entered with that familiar, commanding presence that had defined his career. His walk was purposeful, his expression unreadable, the same poker face that had frustrated opponents on the court for years. Kane watched as Jordan settled into his seat behind the microphone. There was something different about him today, a subtle shift in his demeanor that only someone who had covered his entire career might notice. The usual competitive fire in his eyes was still there, but it was tempered with something else, something that looked almost like peace. As cameras flashed and microphones were adjusted, Kane remembered the first time he'd interviewed Jordan. It was back in '84, when MJ was just a rookie with dreams bigger than anyone could imagine. Now, here they were, potentially at the end of an era that had redefined basketball forever. The questions began, each reporter trying to be the one to get the definitive answer about Jordan's future. They danced around the topic, asking about his recent performances, his thoughts on the team's direction, his plans for the upcoming season. But Jordan, ever the master of the media game, gave nothing away. Then came the moment that would be replayed on sports networks for years to come. Rowan Blair, a young reporter from a small local station, stood up. In the sea of veteran journalists and national correspondents, he seemed out of place. But there was something about his earnest demeanor that caught everyone's attention. "Mr. Jordan," Blair began, his voice steady despite the pressure of the moment, "the world's been speculating about your retirement. Some say you have nothing left to prove. Others believe you still have more to give. What do you say to those who think you should keep playing?" The room held its collective breath. Kane leaned forward, pen poised above his notebook. This was the question everyone had been trying to ask, but hadn't quite found the right words for. Jordan's response would make headlines either way. For a moment, Michael Jordan sat there, the weight of his legacy visible in his expression. Then, with the same precision he'd shown on the court, he delivered a response that would echo through basketball history. "I've given everything I have to this game. When you know, you know." The simplicity of the statement struck like a thunderbolt. No elaborate explanation, no long-winded justification. Just pure, unvarnished truth from the greatest player to ever step on a basketball court. The room erupted in spontaneous applause, not the polite kind you hear at press conferences, but genuine appreciation for a moment of absolute authenticity. Kane watched as Jordan's face softened slightly, the hint of a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. In that moment, he wasn't just the basketball legend, the six-time champion, or the global icon. He was a man at peace with one of the most difficult decisions an athlete can make. The press conference continued, but everything after that felt like an epilogue. Other questions were asked, other answers were given, but that single sentence had said everything that needed to be said. Kane looked around the room, seeing the impact of Jordan's words reflected in the faces of his fellow Journalists, some were furiously typing on their laptops, others just sat there, processing the weight of the moment. As the conference drew to a close, Kane reflected on how this scene would be remembered. Not for the speculation that led up to it, or the analysis that would follow, but for that one perfect moment of clarity. Jordan had done what he'd always done best, taken something complex and made it look simple. Outside the United Center, fans had gathered, hoping to catch a glimpse of their hero. They didn't know yet what had transpired inside, but they would, soon. Kane watched through the window as the crowd grew, their jerseys bearing Jordan's number 23, creating a sea of red and black. The story Kane would write that evening wouldn't be just about a retirement announcement. It would be about the end of an era, about knowing when to walk away, about leaving on your own terms. But most importantly, it would be about that one sentence that said everything. As Jordan stood to leave, he paused for a moment, looking out. Over the assembled media, his eyes met Kane's briefly, and there was a mutual understanding, the kind that only comes from years of professional respect. Kane nodded slightly, acknowledging not just the moment, but the entire journey that had led to it. The impact of Jordan's decision would ripple through the sports world for years to come. But in that press room, on that day, something remarkable had happened. A complex question about legacy, timing, and the future had been answered with perfect simplicity. Kane closed his notebook, knowing he had witnessed something special. In a career spanning decades, he had learned that the most powerful moments often came not from grand speeches or elaborate explanations, but from simple truths spoken with conviction. As the room began to clear, the applause still echoing in everyone's minds, Kane remained in his seat for a moment longer. He thought about all the young players who would try to fill Jordan's shoes, all the future press conferences where reporters would ask similar questions, all the athletes who would face their own moments of truth. But there would never be another moment quite like this, never another athlete quite like Jordan, never another response that could say so much with so few words. The story Kane would file that evening would begin with those 7 words. I've given everything I have to this game. But the story wouldn't end there. It would live on in the memories of everyone who witnessed it, in the countless retellings and replays, in the lessons it taught about knowing when to say goodbye. As the last of the cameras were packed away and the lights dimmed in the press room, Kane gathered his things. He had one more story to write about Michael Jordan, but this time it wasn't about a game-winning shot or another championship. It was about something far more profound, the wisdom to know when the final buzzer had truly sounded. The evening air outside the United Center was crisp with early autumn chill, but the atmosphere remained electric hours after Jordan's announcement. Elias Kane sat in his favorite corner of the press room, now empty, except for a few stragglers packing up their equipment. His laptop screen glowed with the beginning of his article, but his mind kept returning to the moments before Jordan's entrance. Hours earlier, he had watched Cyrus Bellamy, a rookie photographer, frantically adjusting his camera settings. The young man's hands had trembled slightly as he prepared to capture what could be the most significant moment of his career. Kane had smiled, remembering his own nervousness when covering Jordan's first retirement announcement years ago. Now, as the building grew quiet, Kane began to understand the true weight of what he'd witnessed. It wasn't just about basketball. It wasn't even about sports. It was about something far more universal, the courage to walk away at the right time on your own terms. The sound of squeaking sneakers echoed from the distant practice court where a lone ball occasionally bounced against hardwood. Kane knew it was Roman Vale, the team's young point guard, putting in extra hours as he always did. The sound carried a different meaning tonight. The torch was being passed, whether the next generation was ready or not. Kane's phone buzzed with messages from fellow journalists seeking his thoughts. After all, he had covered Jordan's entire career, from the early days when Michael was just a talented rookie from North Carolina to the dynasty years that followed. But how could he put into words what they had all witnessed today? He thought back to a conversation he'd had with Jordan years ago after a particularly grueling playoff game. They were both younger then, Kane still proving himself as a journalist, Jordan establishing his legend. "The hardest part isn't winning," Jordan had told him, off the record. "It's knowing how to carry the weight of everyone's expectations." Those words seemed prophetic now. Jordan's simple statement today, "I've given everything I have to this game," carried the weight of those expectations and released them in the same breath. The cleaning staff began their nightly routine, their movements creating a quiet symphony of rustling and soft footsteps. Among them was Jasper King, who had been maintaining the United Center's floors for over 2 decades. Kane watched as the older man paused near center court, looking up at the championship banners that Jordan had helped raise. 23 years, Jasper said, noticing Kane's presence. "Been here for all of them, never seen anyone like him, never will again." Kane nodded, understanding the profound truth in those simple words. He opened a new document on his laptop and began to write, not the article his editor was waiting for, but something more personal. There are moments in sports that transcend the game, moments when an athlete's decision echoes far beyond the arena, touching something fundamental about human nature itself. Today was such a moment. The words flowed easier now, capturing not just what had happened, but what it meant. Kane wrote about the silence that had fallen over the room before Jordan's response, about the spontaneous applause that followed, about the looks exchanged between veteran reporters who had seen it all but never quite like this. Outside, he could hear fans, still gathered, their voices carrying fragments of conversations about their favorite Jordan moments. Each had their own story. The shot over Elo, the switching hands layup, the flu game, the final shot against Utah. But today, Jordan had given them something different, a lesson in knowing when to write the final chapter. Kane's phone buzzed. Again. This time it was Zane Whitaker, a former player turned commentator. "You were there for his first retirement too," the message read. "How was this different?" The question made Kane pause. He remembered that first retirement announcement. The shock, the disbelief, the questions that followed, this time felt different. There was a finality to it, a sense of completion that hadn't been there before. He thought about how to explain this in his article, how to capture the essence of a moment that wasn't about statistics or achievements, but about the wisdom that comes with knowing yourself completely. The practice court had gone quiet now. Through the corridor, Kane could see Roman Vale gathering his things, his young face thoughtful. The guard had grown up watching Jordan, and now he would be part of the team that would carry on without him. The weight of that transition was visible in his demeanor. Kane's article began to take shape, not as a typical sports story, but as a reflection on legacy, timing, and the courage to walk away. He wrote about the way Jordan's one sentence had cut through all the speculation and debate, providing clarity where there had been confusion. The cleaning crew had reached the press room now. Jasper King moved methodically through the aisles, his mop creating wet trails on the floor. "You know what I'll remember most?" he said, pausing near Kane's seat. The way he said it, no doubt in his voice, no regret, just peace. Kane added that observation to his notes. It was these small details, these human moments, that would help readers understand the true significance of what had transpired. As midnight approached, the United Center had taken on an almost ethereal quality. The empty arena, usually so full of noise and energy, seemed to be holding its breath, processing the day's events just like everyone else. Kane thought about all the young players who would now step into the spotlight, trying to fill the void left by Jordan's departure. He thought about how they would handle the pressure, the expectations, the inevitable comparisons. But mostly, he thought about how Jordan's final press conference had provided a masterclass in leaving a legacy. It wasn't about the championships or the records, though those would stand for generations. It was about knowing who you are and being true to that knowledge, even when the whole world is watching. The article Kane would eventually submit that night wouldn't just be about a basketball player retiring. It would be about the art of knowing when to say goodbye, about the wisdom of walking away while still at the top, about the courage it takes to write your own ending. As he packed up his things, Kane took one last look around the press room. The chairs were empty now, but the energy of the day still lingered. Somewhere in the building, the game balls from Jordan's final season were being stored away, soon to become pieces of history. Tomorrow, the sports world would begin the process of moving forward. There would be endless discussions about Jordan's legacy, about who might step up to fill his shoes, about what this meant for the future of basketball. But tonight, in the quiet of the empty arena, Kane focused on capturing the simple truth of what he had witnessed. His final paragraph came easily. In the end, Michael Jordan's greatest achievement might not be any of his spectacular plays or crucial victories. It might be this moment, knowing exactly when to step away and having the strength to do it with grace. In 7 words, he showed us that true greatness isn't just about knowing how to dominate a game. It's about knowing when the game is truly over. The night janitor's keys jingled in the distance, a reminder that it was time to leave. Kane saved his article, closed his laptop, and stood up. As he walked through the corridors of the United Center one last time, he passed the wall of photographs chronicling Jordan's career. The images told a story of triumph, determination, and excellence, but now they would tell one more story, about the wisdom of knowing when to write the final chapter and the courage to do it on your own terms. In the end, that might be Jordan's most important lesson of all. Dawn broke over Chicago the next morning, casting long shadows across the United Center's empty parking lot. Elias Kane arrived early, knowing this day would be different from any other in his long career. The building's security guard, Everett Stone, gave him a knowing nod as he passed through the entrance. They had both been here for countless mornings, but this one carried the weight of history. Inside, the morning crew was already preparing for the day's media circus. Television crews from around the world were setting up their equipment, each hoping to capture something unique about the aftermath of Jordan's retirement announcement. Among them was Asher Doyle, a veteran cameraman who had filmed Jordan's entire career with the Bulls. 20 years behind the lens, Asher said, adjusting his camera, caught every major moment of his career. But yesterday, that was different. That was final. Kane understood exactly what he meant. The finality of Jordan's statement had left no room for speculation, no space for the usual will he or won't he debates that followed most retirement announcements. 7 words had changed everything. I've given everything I have to this game. This press room was transforming again, this time for the flood of follow-up coverage that would dominate the news cycle. Kane watched as Felix Mercer, the Bulls' young media coordinator, directed traffic with the efficiency of someone who had aged 10 years overnight. The phones hadn't stopped ringing since yesterday's announcement. We've got requests from every continent, Felix said, running a hand through his disheveled hair. Even got a call from a monastery in Tibet. Apparently the monks follow basketball. Who knew? Kane smiled, remembering how Jordan's influence had transcended not just sports but cultures and borders. He pulled out his notebook, already filled. with observations from yesterday, and found a fresh page. Today's story wouldn't be about the announcement itself, but about its echoes. The practice facility was unusually quiet. Through the glass windows, Kane could see August Klein, one of the team's assistant coaches, sitting alone on the bench staring at the court. August had played against Jordan in college, then coached alongside him during the second three-peat. His expression spoke volumes about the void that was already forming. "You know what's crazy?" August said as Kane approached. "We all knew this day was coming, had years to prepare for it, but now that it's here..." He gestured at the empty court, words failing him. Kane jotted down the moment in his notebook. It was these human reactions, these quiet acknowledgements of change, that told the real story of Jordan's impact. The morning progressed, and the building came alive with activity. Television reporters delivered their stand-ups, each trying to find a new angle on a story that had already been told from every possible perspective. But Kane was looking for something different, the stories between the stories. He found one in the equipment room, where Bennett Knox, the team's longtime equipment manager, was carefully packing away Jordan's practice gear. Each item was handled with reverence, like artifacts being prepared for a museum. 23 years, Bennett said, folding a practice jersey. Every game day, same routine. He'd come in early, check his shoes personally, make sure everything was perfect, never took a single detail for granted. Kane watched as Bennett placed the jersey in a special storage box, already labeled for the Hall of Fame. "You know what he told me yesterday?" Said, "Bennett, you're the real MVP. Nobody plays well in uncomfortable shoes." The older man chuckled, but his eyes were moist. Outside the arena, fans had begun gathering again. They came not to watch a game or catch a glimpse of their hero, but simply to be present, to share in this moment of transition. Kane observed as Callum Ford, a local street artist, worked on a massive mural of Jordan on a nearby wall. The image captured Jordan in mid-flight, but it was the expression on his face that caught Kane's attention. Peaceful, satisfied, complete. "Art imitates life," Callum said, stepping back to survey his work. "Yesterday, when he made that announcement, that's the expression I'm trying to capture. The look of a man who knows he's done everything he set out to do." Back inside, Kane found himself in the trophy room, where the 6 championship trophies gleamed under carefully positioned lights. Phoenix Wilder, the team historian, was updating the display cases with new placards that would tell the story of Jordan's final season. "It's interesting," Phoenix mused, adjusting a photograph. "Most great athletes' stories end with a decline, a gradual fading away. But this is different. It's like the perfect final sentence in a perfect story." Kane thought about that. As he continued his rounds through the building, he passed Roman Vale again, now joined by other young players in the practice facility. They were running drills, but there was a different energy to their movements, a recognition that the shadow they had played under was lifting, bringing both opportunity and responsibility. In the media room, Felix was still fielding calls, but now he was joined by Emmett Rhodes, the team's public relations director. They were discussing how to handle the inevitable questions about the future, about who would step into the void, about what came next. "The thing is," Emmett said, noticing Kane's presence, "there is no next Jordan. That's not the story we need to tell. The story is about the legacy he left, the standard he set, the example he showed yesterday about how to end a chapter with dignity." Kane nodded, understanding that this was perhaps the most important angle of all. Jordan's last press conference hadn't just been about retirement. It had been a masterclass in how to handle life's transitions. As afternoon approached, Kane found himself back in the press room where cleaning crews were preparing for another day of media coverage. Jasper King was there again, but this time he was helping to set up chairs instead of cleaning them. "You know what's funny?" Jasper said, straightening a row of seats. All these years, I watched him practice when nobody else was around. The man never did anything halfway. Even yesterday, that announcement, straight to the point, no hesitation, no doubt. That's Jordan for you. Kane's phone buzzed with a message from his editor, asking for a follow-up piece about the team's future. But as he sat down to write, he realized there was a more important story to tell, about how one man's decision to walk away had touched so many lives in so many different ways. He began typing. The day after Michael Jordan's retirement announcement, the United Center feels like a cathedral of memories. In every corner, there are stories. In every face, there are reflections of what was and what will be. But perhaps the most powerful story is the one about how to say goodbye, not just to a career, but to a chapter of life that has defined you. As the day wore on, more people filtered through the building, each carrying their own piece of the Jordan story. There was Soren Bishop, a former Bulls ball boy who was now a successful businessman, coming to pay his respects. There was Camden Holt, a local youth coach who had built his program around Jordan's principles of hard work and dedication. Each had been touched by Jordan's career in different ways, but all spoke about yesterday's announcement with the same sense of respect and understanding. It wasn't just what Jordan had said, but how he had said it, with clarity, with certainty, with peace. Kane's article took shape as he moved through the building, collecting these moments, these perspectives, these small but significant reactions to a massive change in the basketball world. He realized that the story wasn't just about an athlete retiring, it was about how one person's wisdom in knowing when to step away could inspire others to reflect on their own lives, their own choices, their own moments of transition. As evening approached, the crowds began to thin, but the weight of yesterday's announcement still hung in the air. Kane found himself back at center court, where Jasper was finishing his day's work. The old janitor paused, leaning on his mop, looking up at the rafters, where Jordan's jersey would soon join the other retired numbers. "You know what people will remember most about yesterday?" Jasper asked. Not the words themselves, but the way he said them. Like a man who knows exactly who he is and where he's going. That's rare, especially in a world where everyone's always trying to hold on to something. Kane wrote those words down, knowing they would find their way into his article. As he packed up his things to leave, he took one last look around the arena. Tomorrow, the world would move on. The NBA would continue, new stars would rise, new stories would be written. But for now, in the quiet of this moment, the echoes of yesterday's 7 words still resonated through the building, teaching everyone who heard them about the power of knowing when to write your own ending. The news cycle never sleeps, but it does evolve. 3 days after Jordan's retirement announcement, Elias Kane found himself in a different kind of press room, this time at the NBA headquarters in New York. The gathered media wasn't just sports journalists anymore. They were cultural commentators, business analysts, and social historians, all trying to understand the broader implications of Jordan's departure. Zane Whitaker, now a prominent sports network analyst, stood before a panel of experts, his voice carrying the weight of someone who had both played against and covered Jordan's career. What we witnessed wasn't just a retirement announcement, he explained. It was a masterclass in how to end a chapter with dignity. Kane watched from the back of the room, his notebook open but untouched. He'd been invited to participate in this special roundtable discussion, not just as a journalist who had covered Jordan's career, but as someone who had been present for that final, powerful moment. Maddox Reed, a sports psychologist who had worked with numerous professional athletes, leaned forward in his chair. "The psychology behind those 7 words is fascinating," he said. "No justification, no elaborate explanation, just pure authenticity. That's incredibly rare in professional sports, where athletes often struggle with the concept of walking away. The discussion continued, moving beyond the immediate impact of Jordan's retirement to its broader implications. Arlo Bennett, a cultural anthropologist who specialized in sports sociology, offered his perspective. What Jordan did was provide a template for how to handle life transitions. It wasn't just about basketball anymore. Kane thought back to the countless retirement announcements he'd covered over the years. Some had been emotional spectacles, others carefully orchestrated PR events. But Jordan's, it had been something entirely different, a moment of pure clarity that transcended the sport itself. The conversation shifted as Cyrus Bellamy, a sports business analyst, presented data on the economic impact of Jordan's career in retirement. The numbers were staggering, but what caught Kane's attention was the analyst's conclusion. The most valuable thing Jordan gave us wasn't measured in dollars. It was showing us how to leave a legacy intact. During a break in the proceedings, Kane found himself in conversation with Roman Vale, who had flown in to represent the younger generation of players. The young guard's perspective was particularly poignant. "You know what's crazy?" Roman said, his voice quiet. "We all grew up wanting to be like Mike on the court, but now he's teaching us something even more important: how to handle ourselves off it." The afternoon session focused on the media's role in covering career endings. Felix Mercer, who had joined virtually from Chicago, shared insights about the challenges of managing such a momentous announcement. What made this different was its simplicity, he explained. No leaks, no speculation, just truth delivered with absolute certainty. Kane noticed how the conversation kept coming back to those 7 words. "I've given everything I have to this game." Jasper King's observation from days ago rang true. It wasn't just what Jordan said, but how he said it that made the moment so powerful. As the day progressed, the discussion broadened to include voices from outside the basketball world. Everett Stone, a performance coach who worked with business executives, drew parallels between Jordan's retirement and leadership transitions in the corporate world. "What we're seeing here is a template for authentic leadership," Everett explained. "The ability to recognize when it's time to step aside and the courage to do it on your own terms. That's relevant far beyond sports." During the afternoon break, Kane found himself in a quiet corner with August Klein, who had also been invited to speak. The assistant coach shared a detail that hadn't been public before. "The day before the announcement, I saw him in the practice facility," August recalled. "He was alone, just standing at center court. When I asked if he was okay, he smiled and said, 'Sometimes you just know.' That's when I realized what was coming." The story resonated with Kane, who added it to his growing collection of moments that painted a fuller picture of Jordan's decision. It wasn't just about the announcement itself anymore. It was about the wisdom that led to it. As the day wore on, the discussion turned to the future of basketball in the post-Jordan era. Bennett Knox, speaking from his decades of experience in the game, offered a perspective that silenced the room. The greatest gift Jordan gave us wasn't the championships or the memorable moments. It was showing us that even legends are human, and that there's grace in knowing when to say goodbye. The late afternoon session featured a panel on athletic identity and retirement. Elias Kane found himself sharing the stage with Emmett Rhodes and Phoenix Wilder, each offering their unique perspective on how Jordan's announcement had changed the conversation about career endings in sports. "What we witnessed," Phoenix observed, "was someone choosing their moment rather than having it chosen for them. That's revolutionary in professional sports." Kane thought about how to capture this aspect in his writing. The story had evolved from a simple retirement announcement to something far more universal, a lesson about timing, wisdom, and the courage to write your own ending. As evening approached, the discussions became more personal. Athletes from other sports called in to share their thoughts. Business leaders drew parallels to their own industries. The conversation had transcended basketball, becoming a broader meditation on knowing when to step away. Asher Doyle, who had been filming the proceedings, captured a powerful moment when Soren Bishop, a former athlete turned business executive, shared his perspective. Jordan didn't just show us how to play basketball. He showed us how to leave a legacy, how to end a chapter, how to move forward with dignity. The day's final session focused on the historical context of Jordan's retirement. Camden Holt, a sports historian, placed the announcement alongside other iconic moments in basketball history. What makes this unique, he explained, is its simplicity. No fanfare, no drama, just pure authenticity. As the formal proceedings wound down, Kane found himself in conversation with Felix Mercer again. The young media coordinator shared an observation that stuck with Kane. "You know what's remarkable? In an age of hot takes and viral moments, Jordan gave us something genuine. That's becoming increasingly rare." The evening ended with an informal gathering where the day's participants continued to share stories and perspectives. Kane listened as August Klein described the atmosphere in the Bulls' practice facility now. "It's different, but not in the way you'd expect. There's this sense of, I don't know, permission to move forward." On his way out, Kane passed a television monitor replaying Jordan's announcement. He stopped to watch, struck again by the power of that moment, the simplicity of it, the certainty, the peace in Jordan's expression as he delivered those 7 words. Back in his hotel room, Kane began writing his piece about the day's proceedings. He realized that what he had witnessed wasn't just a discussion about a basketball player's retirement. It was an exploration of how one person's wisdom in knowing when to step away could inspire others to reflect on their own lives, their own choices, their own moments of transition. He wrote late into the night, trying to capture the way Jordan's decision had resonated beyond the sport, touching something universal about human nature and the courage it takes to write your own ending. As midnight approached, Kane received a message from Roman Vale. "You know what's amazing? Yesterday at practice, I found myself standing at center court, just like you said Jordan did. And for the first time, I wasn't thinking about filling his shoes. I was thinking about finding my own path." Kane added that detail to his article, understanding that Jordan's legacy wouldn't just be about what he achieved, but about how he chose to walk away, teaching others that sometimes the most powerful statement is the simplest one, delivered with absolute certainty and peace. The next morning, as Kane prepared to return to Chicago, he reflected on how Jordan's retirement announcement had become something larger than basketball. It had become a template for authenticity, a lesson in timing, and a reminder that sometimes the most profound moments come not from grand gestures, but from simple truths spoken with absolute conviction. A week after Jordan's retirement announcement, the United Center stood quiet in the pre-dawn hours. Elias Kane walked through the empty corridors, retracing the path that had led to that momentous press conference. He wasn't alone. Jasper King was there too, but not to clean. Today he was being interviewed for a special documentary about the people behind the scenes who had witnessed Jordan's entire career. 23 years, Jasper said, running his hand along the wall of the tunnel leading to the court. Every game night he touched this same spot, right here. Said it was for luck, but I think it was more about connection, knowing where you've been, you know? The documentary was August Klein's idea. The assistant coach had realized that while everyone knew Jordan's story, few knew about the lives he had touched along the way. Kane had been invited to participate not just as a journalist, but as someone who had chronicled the human side of Jordan's journey. Roman Vale arrived early that morning, before his usual practice time. The young guard had been struggling with something beyond basketball, and he finally shared it with Kane. "That press conference changed how I think about my own career," he admitted. "It's not just about playing anymore. It's about understanding your journey, The film crew, led by Asher Doyle, set up their equipment in various locations throughout the arena. They were capturing something different today, not the spectacular plays or championship moments, but the quiet spaces where legends are built and farewells are whispered. Bennett Knox emerged from the equipment room, carrying a box of memories. "Found these this morning," he said, carefully laying out a collection of practice jerseys, each telling its own story of preparation and persistence. Every single one has a story, but you know what's interesting? The practice jerseys tell more about him than the game ones ever could. The morning light filtered through the high windows of the arena as Phoenix Wilder, the team historian, began organizing decades of photographs. There was something poetic about how Jordan's career had been captured frame by frame, leading to that final moment of clarity. "Look at this," Phoenix said, holding up a photo from Jordan's rookie year. Same determination in his eyes then as in that press conference. Just different. Wiser, maybe. Like he'd learned something about himself that most of us spend a lifetime trying to figure out. Emmett Rhodes joined them, carrying a thick folder of press clippings. "You know what's fascinating?" he said, spreading them out. "All these years of coverage, and nothing captures him quite like those 7 words from last week. Sometimes less, really, is more." The documentary team moved through the building, collecting stories. They found Felix Mercer in the media room, still managing the aftermath of the announcement. "The phones haven't stopped," he said, "but the questions have changed. Now they're asking about the how and why, not just the what." Everett Stone had his own story to share. As the arena's head of security, he had seen a different side of Jordan. Every game day he'd arrive early, not just to practice, but to find his center. That last day, he came in even earlier. I think he knew what was coming, and he wanted one more quiet moment in this place. The cameras rolled as Maddox Reed, who had worked with countless athletes through career transitions, shared his perspective. "What Jordan did was revolutionary," he explained. "He showed that walking away isn't about what you're leaving behind, but about being at peace with what you've given." Throughout the morning, more people arrived to share their stories. Arlo Bennett, who had been a rookie trainer during Jordan's final season, spoke about the subtle signs he had noticed. "It wasn't about declining skills or diminishing passion," he said. "It was about completion, like finishing a perfect sentence." Kane watched as Cyrus Bellamy set up for his interview segment. The veteran photographer had captured countless images of Jordan over the years, but his most powerful shot was from the retirement announcement, a simple profile of a man at peace with his decision. "You know what makes that photo special?" Cyrus asked, showing it to Kane. "It's not what you see, it's what you feel. There's no conflict there, no doubt, just certainty." The documentary team moved to the practice court, where August Klein had prepared something special. He had marked the exact spots of some of Jordan's most memorable practice moments, the countless shots taken after hours, the drills that had become legendary. "But you want to know the most important spot?" August said, walking to center court. "Right here, where he stood that last day, knowing it was time. That's the spot where he taught us his final lesson." As the day progressed, more stories emerged. Zane Whitaker shared how Jordan's decision had influenced his own approach to broadcasting. "It taught me that authenticity doesn't need embellishment. Sometimes the simplest truth is the most powerful." The cameras captured Soren Bishop demonstrating the exact position where he had stood during the press conference. "I've covered hundreds of these things," he said, "but this was different. You could feel it in the room. Everyone knew they were witnessing something beyond sports." Camden Holt, who had been analyzing game footage for years, brought a different perspective. "Look at his last few games," he said, rolling the tape. "He wasn't playing like someone desperate to hold on. He was playing like someone who knew exactly where he was in his journey." The afternoon light cast long shadows across the court as Roman Vale shared his own revelation. "Yesterday, I was watching old footage of Jordan's games," he said. But for the first time, I wasn't studying his moves. I was studying his understanding of the moment. That's what that press conference was about, understanding your moment. Asher Doyle's cameras captured the way the building itself seemed to hold these stories. Every corner, every hallway, every room had witnessed some part of Jordan's journey. But it was the press room that held the most recent memory, those 7 words that had changed everything. Felix Mercer had organized a special display of global media coverage of the announcement. Newspapers and magazines from around the world, each trying to capture the significance of the moment. But none of them needed more than those 7 words, Felix noted. Jordan had already said it all. As evening approached, Kane found himself back in the press room with Jasper King. The old janitor was sharing his own perspective on legacy. "You know what's funny?" he said, looking around the empty room. "People think legacy is about what you'd leave behind, but sometimes it's about how you leave." He showed us that. The documentary team captured one final scene. The sunset filtering through the United Center's windows, casting a golden glow over the court. It was the same light that had been present during countless Jordan performances. But now it illuminated something different, a space where one of sport's greatest stories had found its perfect ending. Kane's final interview for the documentary summed up what many had been trying to articulate. "What we witnessed wasn't just a retirement announcement," he said. "It was a moment of perfect clarity when someone showed us that the greatest victory sometimes comes not from what you achieve, but from knowing when you've achieved enough." As the film crew packed up their equipment, August Klein shared one last observation. "You know what's remarkable?" he said. "A week later, and we're still finding new meaning in those 7 words. That's not just about basketball anymore. That's about life." The day ended as it had begun, with the United Center standing quiet and majestic. But now its walls held fresh stories, new perspectives on a moment that had transcended sports. Jordan's 7 words had done more than end a career. They had started countless conversations about authenticity, wisdom, and the courage to write your own ending. Kane's final notes for the day captured something essential about what they had documented. Sometimes the most powerful stories are told in the quietest moments, by the people who witnessed not just the greatness, but the humanity behind it. Jordan's last press conference wasn't just about ending a career. It was about showing us all how to move forward with grace and certainty. As the lights dimmed in the arena, the documentary team had captured something unique. Not just the end of an era, but the beginning of a new understanding about what it means to leave a legacy. It wasn't just about the championships or the spectacular plays anymore. It was about the wisdom to know when you've given everything you have, and the courage to say it with complete conviction. 2 weeks after Jordan's retirement announcement, Elias Kane found himself in a unique position. He was sitting in a global sports summit in London, where the ripple effects of those 7 words were still being felt across continents. The conference room at the Royal Institute of Sports was filled with journalists, athletes, and cultural figures from around the world, each bringing their own perspective on what Jordan's final message meant to their corner of the globe. August. Klein had flown in to represent the Bulls organization, but his role had evolved beyond that of an assistant coach. He had become something of an interpreter of the moment, helping others understand the profound simplicity of Jordan's farewell. In Japan, a Tokyo-based sports commentator shared, "They're calling it the perfect bow," a reference to the traditional way of showing respect through the art of knowing when to exit. Kane wrote this down, struck by how Jordan's words had transcended cultural barriers. Roman Vale, who had been invited to speak about the next generation's perspective, sat beside Kane during the morning session. "It's crazy," he whispered. I'm getting messages from young players in Africa, Europe, Asia, all of them talking about those 7 words. It's like he gave everyone permission to be honest about their own journey. The summit's main hall featured a display organized by Phoenix Wilder, showcasing how different media outlets around the world had covered the announcement. What struck Kane was the consistency. Regardless of language or culture, everyone had recognized the power of Jordan's simple statement. In Brazilian Portuguese, Emmett Rhodes explained, pointing to one headline, the translation actually becomes more powerful. It speaks to the idea of giving your soul to something, not just your effort. The morning sessions focused on how Jordan's retirement announcement had influenced athletes in other sports. Cyrus Bellamy shared footage he had captured of reactions from tennis courts to soccer fields, all reflecting on the same theme, the wisdom of knowing when to write your own ending. Bennett Knox, who had been collecting stories from equipment, managers worldwide, shared a particularly moving account from a cricket ground in India. This elderly gentleman, who's been maintaining the pitch for 40 years, said he finally understood how to tell his own son it was time to take over. Sometimes, he said, you just need someone to show you how to say goodbye. The afternoon brought a panel discussion featuring Maddox Reed and several international sports psychologists. They explored how Jordan's approach to retirement could reshape how athletes think about career transitions. What's fascinating, Maddox explained, is how these 7 words have become a template for authenticity across cultures. Athletes from completely different backgrounds are using them as a touchstone for their own decisions. Felix Mercer, managing the media aspects of the summit, had prepared a striking presentation showing how Jordan's message had been shared across social media platforms globally. The fascinating thing, he noted, is that no one tried to add to it or modify it. Those 7 words were perfect as they were. During a break, Kane found himself in conversation with Everett Stone, who had been studying the security footage from various arenas around the world in the days following Jordan's announcement. You see fans just standing there, looking at empty courts, he said, like they're trying to absorb the meaning of it all. The summit's afternoon sessions took an unexpected turn when Arlo Bennett presented research on how Jordan's retirement announcement was being taught in business schools across Asia. They're using it as a case study in authentic leadership, he explained, not just the what, but the how of stepping away. As the day progressed, more international perspectives emerged. Zane Whitaker moderated a panel where athletes from different sports and countries shared how Jordan's words had influenced their own thinking about career endings. In Australia, a retired cricket player explained, we have this culture of playing until you drop, but Jordan showed us there's another way, a way that preserves your legacy while respecting the game. Soren Bishop, who had been documenting reactions from European soccer clubs, shared a poignant observation. What's remarkable is how these 7 words translate perfectly into any language because they speak to something universal, the human understanding of completion. The evening session brought a surprise video conference with Camden Holt, who had been traveling across Asia collecting reactions to Jordan's announcement. In every gym I visit, he reported, from Seoul to Singapore, they've posted those words, not just as a quote, but as a philosophy. Asher Doyle's documentary footage, now incorporating international perspectives, played on screens throughout the venue. The power of Jordan's message seemed to grow with each new cultural context it encountered. In Arabic, a Lebanese sports writer explained, the translation captures something beautiful about giving everything to your purpose. It becomes almost poetic, but without losing its fundamental truth. Kane watched as Roman Vale participated in a youth basketball clinic being held alongside the summit. The young players, representing dozens of countries, all wanted to know the same thing, not about Jordan's greatest plays, but about how he knew it was time. That's the real legacy, Roman told them. not just the championships or the highlights, but showing us all how to listen to our own truth. As night fell in London, the summit's participants gathered for a final session that felt more like a global conversation about authenticity and timing. Felix Mercer had arranged for live video feeds from basketball courts around the world, each showing how Jordan's message had been embraced by different communities. In Senegal, a coach explained through an interpreter, "We have a saying about knowing when the dance is complete." Jordan's words captured that same wisdom, but for all of sports. Emmett Rhodes shared data showing how the announcement had influenced retirement discussions across different sports and cultures. "What we're seeing," he said, "is a fundamental shift in how athletes everywhere think about career endings." The summit's final hours brought reflection on how Jordan's words had created a new framework for discussing athletic legacy. August Klein summed it up. He didn't just show us how to play basketball, he showed the whole world how to write the perfect ending. As the event wound down, Kane found himself sitting with Phoenix Wilder, reviewing materials for the historical archive. "You know what's remarkable?" Phoenix said. "In 50 years, people won't just remember what he said. They'll remember how it made them feel, across languages, across cultures, across generations." The night ended with a special video compilation showing reaction shots from around the world at the moment Jordan's retirement announcement was broadcast. Despite the different languages and settings, the expressions were remarkably similar, recognition of a profound truth being spoken. Bennett Knox, who had been quietly observing throughout the day, shared a final thought that Kane knew would lead his article about the summit. Jordan spoke 7 words in English, but he said something universal about the human experience, about knowing yourself, about respect for your journey, about the wisdom of perfect timing. As Kane packed up his notes, Roman Vale approached with one last observation. "You know what's amazing?" he said. "In every country I visit now, young players don't just want to play like Jordan. They want to understand the game like he did, including when it's time to say goodbye." The summit had revealed something extraordinary, how 7 simple words, spoken with absolute conviction, had transcended sport, culture, and language to touch something fundamentally human. It wasn't just about basketball anymore. It wasn't even just about sports. It was about the universal search for authenticity and the courage to recognize when your chapter is complete. Kane's final notes captured the essence of what he had witnessed. In the end, Jordan's greatest achievement might not be any of his spectacular plays or crucial victories. It might be showing the world that true greatness isn't just about how you perform. It's about knowing when your performance is complete and having the wisdom to say so with perfect clarity. As the lights dimmed in the summit hall, the global conversation Jordan had started with those 7 words continued to echo across time zones and cultures, teaching everyone who heard them about the power of knowing when you've given everything. You have, and the grace to say it simply and with conviction. 1 month after Michael Jordan's retirement announcement, Elias Kane sat in his familiar spot in the United Center press room. The arena was quiet, but not empty. Today marked a special gathering, a private reflection on the moment that had changed not just basketball, but how the world thought about endings and transitions. The room had been transformed. Along the walls, Cyrus Bellamy's photographs chronicled the journey from that press conference to its global aftermath. Phoenix Wilder had curated a timeline showing how those 7 words had rippled through time and space, touching lives far beyond the basketball court. August Klein stood at the podium where Jordan had delivered his memorable statement. "You know what's remarkable," he began, addressing the small gathering of those who had been there that day. "A month later, and we're still understanding new layers of what happened in this room." Roman Vale, who had just returned from an international basketball camp, shared how young players worldwide had internalized Jordan's message. "They don't just quote those words," he said. "They understand them. It's become a philosophy about authenticity and self-awareness." Bennett Knox brought out something special, the microphone Jordan had used that day. "Sometimes," he said, handling it with reverence, "the simplest tools carry the most powerful messages. 7 words through this mic changed how we think about legacy." The gathering wasn't just about remembering, it was about understanding. Emmett Rhodes had compiled data on how Jordan's retirement announcement had influenced other athletes' career decisions in just 1 month. "We're seeing a shift," he explained. "Athletes are starting to view retirement not as an ending, but as a completion." Asher Doyle's final cut of his documentary played on screens around the room. The footage captured not just the announcement, but the human reactions, from the press room to street courts in Manila, from corporate boardrooms to high school gymnasiums. "What we witnessed," Maddox Reed observed, "wasn't just a sports moment. It was a masterclass in self-awareness that transcended athletics. Jordan showed us that the greatest strength sometimes lies in knowing when to walk away." Felix Mercer, who had managed the media storm that followed the announcement, shared something surprising. "The requests for interviews haven't stopped," he said. "But they're different now. They're not asking about the past. They're asking about the wisdom behind those 7 words." Everett Stone, still manning his security post, had his own perspective to share. "You know what's changed," he said. "The way people enter this building now. They're not just coming to see where Jordan played. They're coming to stand where he taught us all something about dignity and timing." The afternoon brought a special satellite link-up organized by Arlo Bennett, connecting the gathering with basketball courts around the world. From Beijing to Buenos Aires, people shared how Jordan's words had influenced their communities. "In 1 month," Zane Whitaker noted, watching the global feeds, "these 7 words have done more to change how we think about athletic careers than decades of sports psychology research." Soren Bishop, who had been collecting stories from athletes in transition, shared a powerful observation. What Jordan gave us wasn't just a template for retirement. It was a lesson in how to listen to your own truth and speak it without hesitation. Camden Holt had prepared a special presentation analyzing how Jordan's announcement differed from other legendary athletes' retirements. "The key," he explained, "wasn't in what was said, but in what wasn't. No justification needed, no explanation required, just pure clarity." As the day progressed, more stories emerged. Jasper King, who had cleaned the press room for decades, shared his own revelation. "You know what I've noticed? People walk differently in here now, like they're walking on holy ground, not because of the championships, but because of that moment of perfect truth." The gathering took an unexpected turn when Roman Vale received a video message from a young player in Senegal. The boy spoke in his native Wolof, but his message was clear. He had learned from Jordan not just how to play, but how to listen to his own heart. That's the real legacy, August Klein reflected. Not the championships, not the records, but teaching the next generation about authenticity and self-awareness. Phoenix Wilder had created a special exhibit showing how Jordan's 7 words had been translated into dozens of languages. Yet somehow, he noted, they never lose their power, because they speak to something beyond language. The late afternoon brought a moment of quiet reflection. The gathered group stood in the exact spots they had occupied during the announcement. Kane found himself back in his corner, notebook open, just as it had been that day. "You know what's extraordinary?" "Emmett," Rhodes said, breaking the silence. "We're all still here, still finding new meaning in those words. That's not about basketball anymore, that's about truth." Bennett Knox shared something he had kept private until now, a handwritten note from Jordan the morning of the announcement. He wrote, Sometimes the hardest part is making it look simple. That's what those 7 words did. They made the impossible look simple. As evening approached, Felix Mercer played a compilation of news coverage from around the world. The stories weren't about statistics or achievements. They were about wisdom, about timing, about the courage to write your own ending. In 1 month, Maddox Reed observed, we've seen these words change how people think about transitions in all walks of life. Corporate CEOs are quoting them. Teachers are using them. It's become a universal lesson in authenticity. The gathering's final hours brought a surprise. Video messages from athletes across different sports who had been influenced by Jordan's announcement. Each shared how those 7 words had helped them think differently about their own journeys. Asher Doyle's cameras captured these final moments, as the group reflected on how a single press conference had evolved into a global conversation about authenticity, timing, and the courage to speak your truth. You know what we really witnessed that day? August Klein asked, standing again at the podium. We saw someone show us that the greatest victory sometimes comes not from what you achieve, but from knowing when you've achieved enough. Kane looked around the room at the faces of those who had been there that day, now changed by their understanding of what they had witnessed. His final notes captured something essential about the journey they had all taken. 1 month ago, in this room, 7 words changed how we think about endings. But they did more than that. They showed us that sometimes the most powerful statement is the simplest one, delivered with absolute certainty and peace. As the gathering drew to a close, Roman Vale shared one last thought that seemed to capture everything. Jordan showed us that greatness isn't just about what you accomplish. It's about knowing who you are and having the courage to be true to that knowledge. The night ended with a simple ceremony. Each person present wrote down what those 7 words had meant to them, creating a time capsule for future generations. Not to preserve the words themselves, they would never be forgotten, but to capture how they had changed our understanding of what it means to end something with dignity and grace. Kane's final article about the gathering would begin, "A month ago, Michael Jordan taught us something profound about endings. But what we've learned since then is that true endings aren't about stopping. They're about completing, and sometimes the most complete statement you can make is the simplest one. I've given everything I have to this game." As the lights dimmed, in the United Center one last time, those 7 words continued to echo, not just through the arena, but through time and space, teaching everyone who heard them about the power of knowing your truth and the courage to speak it with perfect clarity.